Hello! So it's Katie, and I'm here to wrap up the first 8 months or so of 2020 in the books that I've currently read. And then I also want to go over the books that I'm currently reading and my thoughts on them so far. So let's start. The first book I read this year was A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab, and I gave it 4 stars. It was a really good book, and I'm really glad it was the first book that I've read in about 6 years, and I'm really glad it was my first book because it really was like, got my brain being like, okay, you can read again. The next book I read was Terrier by Tamora Pierce, the first book in the Becca Cooper trilogy, and I gave it 4 stars. It was a reread from when I was in high school, and I'm glad that it held up. The next book that I read was Alias Grace by Margaret Atwood, and I gave it 4 stars. Pretty good book. The next book that I read was The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, and I gave it 5 stars. Really do like dystopians, so it was really interesting to read. The next book that I read was The Tattooist of Auschwitz by Heather Morris, and I gave it 3 stars. I thought the impact of the story was really good, but it wasn't really a story for me. The next book is Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn. Didn't say Jillian this time, keep saying Jillian. Because Jillian with a G is my sister's name, so like I'm programmed for Jillian with a G to be pronounced Jillian, not Gillian, but whatever. I gave that book 4 stars. I kind of saw the ending coming, but it was still pretty good. The next book that I read was Girl Last Seen by Nina Lauren, and I gave it 3 stars. It was an okay thriller. I didn't really particularly care about any of the characters very much, so it was about a 3 for me. The next book is The Woman in the Window by A.J. Finn, and I gave this 5 stars. 5 stars. And I cried at a certain point, or almost cried at a certain point in this book while I was substituting a high school class, and not a good idea to cry in front of high school students. Or almost cry. They were very confused, and I felt kind of bad, but I cried. The next 3 books that I read were actually audiobooks, and the first one was How to Read Literature Like a Professor by Thomas Foster, and I gave it 4 stars. I've never been particularly good at deconstructing and critically reading books. Just my brain has never really been good at that. I generally only really read for enjoyment, not critical thinking. But this book was really interesting and helped me kind of understand a little bit how people critical read, even though my brain still won't do it. Like, I can't pick out theme, I can't pick out anything. I just like, oh, that was a good book. But interesting. The next book was Atomic Habits by James Clear, and I gave it 2 stars. He had not really good advice, in my opinion, for me, so I didn't particularly enjoy it, and I kind of just made the book go by faster because I did not want to finish it, but I decided I was going to. And the third audiobook that I read was Astrophysics for People in a Hurry by Neil deGrasse Tyson, and I loved that one, and I gave it 4 stars. The next book that I read was Pretty Girls by Karen Slaughter, and I gave it 5 stars. I really liked that it was a thriller in third person, and we had multiple viewpoints, which I hadn't really found before in any thrillers that I had read, so I was really happy to see that in this book. The next book that I read while tutoring a couple of students at the beginning of the quarantine period, and it was The Giver by Lewis Lowry, and both me and the kids that I was reading it to, we all gave it 5 stars. They all really liked it. The next book that I read was The Wife Between Us by Geir Hendricks and Sarah Pekkanen, and I gave it 4 stars. It was just, a book. It was fine. The next book I read I also didn't like very much, and it was Rage by Richard Bachman, aka Stephen King, and I gave it 3 stars. I didn't really get it, and I don't really like Stephen King's wordiness. This was the second Stephen King that I had tried to read, and I had finished this one because it was like 167 pages, and the first one I stopped reading because it was just like so verbose but not getting anywhere. Like, there's other books that like have lots of words and like are very like long, but like you get the point, you understand what's going on. I just was like, I don't care. And I didn't really care about the people in this book either. I didn't really care how it ended, so I gave it 3. The next book that I read was The Hate List by Jennifer Brown, and I gave it 5 stars. I really liked this book. I would say it's like top 5 so far this year that I've read. I really empathized with the main character, and it was really wonderful to read her journey. So I really liked that book. The next book, I think, is my favorite book of the year. My favorite book of the year so far, but I think it's going to be really hard to break it, is The Martian by Andy Weir. This is my first sci-fi ever, and I think about this book on like a daily occurrence. Like, I think about it all the time. I'm probably going to reread it before the year ends because it's so good. It's so good. Please, if you like sci-fi, read it. It's a good introductory book. For me, it was, at least. Now, I love sci-fi so much. Another 3-star read for me was The Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren. These characters did not really feel like they had personality or anything. They felt kind of like cardboard cutouts. I enjoyed the trope of enemies to lovers. It's probably one of my favorite tropes. But it didn't, I mean, it worked, but it didn't feel like, these characters didn't feel like people. They just felt like ideas. And it was fine, but I didn't like it as much as the next romance that I read, which was Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuinton. I gave this 5 stars. This is also probably one of my top 5 books of the year. It was really, really good. I'm probably also going to reread this one because I loved it so much. The next book was The Immortalists by Chloe Benjamin. I gave this 3 stars. It was fine. I don't really have much else to say other than that. It was fine. I enjoyed the different characters' perspectives. It was interesting to read, but it was fine. The next book that I read was True Colors by Kristen Hanna, and I gave this 4 stars. It was good. I really enjoyed the true crimey aspect in it. That's what drew me to it in the first place. And I love a good redemption. So this one was pretty good. Sorry. The next book that I read was Dry by Neal Shusterman, and I gave it 4 stars. My only real complaint was the weird romancy plotline that I found kind of creepy and didn't really like. I didn't understand why there needed to be a romance in this. So that bumped it down a little bit. The next book that I read was We Are the Ants by Sean David Hutchinson, and I gave it 5 stars. It's a really good book, really liked it, really felt for the main character, and would recommend. The next book that I read is the only classics novel that I've read so far this year, and it's Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. And this is another reread from when I was in high school. I think I was too young the first time that I read it because I didn't get it at all, but rereading it a second time as an adult, I really enjoyed it and I gave it 5 stars. The next book that I read was The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers, and I also gave this 5 stars. I quite enjoyed it. I liked each different characters. I liked the different alien races. I liked their journey. I liked the character development. It's pretty good. I would definitely recommend this one as well. The next book that I read, I gave 1 star, and I hated it. It was Nevernight by Jay Kristoff. I don't have the book anymore because I got rid of it. I didn't want to keep it in my house. I hated it. I didn't like the plot. I hated the weird sexist things that happened in it, and I just not my favorite book ever. So 1 star. The next book that I read was The Red Queen by Victoria Aveyard. I don't know how to pronounce that. I'm gonna be honest, I don't know how to pronounce that. And this was another book that I really enjoyed. It has another one of my favorite like plot trope things where a common person is plucked out of their normal everyday life and put into like a higher class royalty situation, and they have to like learn how to survive and be in that area with a bit of a twist because she like tries to start a rebellion, which was fun. Don't know if I'm going to continue the series. I liked the first book, but I have to read the synopsises of the other ones because at this point I'm not entirely sure if I want to read them. The second to last book that I've read so far this year is A Winter's Promise by Christelle Debos? I don't know. It's French. Not good at French, so I don't know how to say that. And I gave it 4 stars. I really liked it. Again, it has the same trope of plucking someone from their normal everyday life and putting them in a different situation, generally through an arranged marriage. And oh boy, am I excited to read the second one. But I don't want to get it in hardback because I have this one in paperback, so I'm gonna wait until the new one comes out in paperback. But loved this. The last book that I've read so far this year is Mistborn #1, The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson, and I gave this 5 stars. I have the rest of the series. It's right there on the bookshelf. And I'm going to get to them, but I don't want to immediately get into them because I want to savor this, because this was fantastic and amazing and I loved it so much. So it was great. Please read it. Pretty sure like most people have read it by now, but I loved it. So now I want to go over the 5 books that I'm currently reading, and will hopefully show you probably around the end of September, because this is the end of August essentially, and I'll just wait. So the first book that I'm currently reading is The Way of Shadows by Brent Weeks. I'm about that far into it, and I'm really enjoying it so far. I like assassin plots. I wish Nevernight could have been like this a little bit, because I would have liked it a lot more. But this was really good. The next book that I'm currently reading is Hyperion by Dan Simmons, and I'm liking it so far. I've literally read the first page, but I was hooked on the first page, so I think we're good. The next book that I'm reading at the moment is The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan, and I'm this far, and it's a mass market paperback, so it's huge, but I'm really liking it. I can see why it's a classic. The next book is the first book in the Witcher series. I bought Witcher 3 for my Switch, which is over here, but you can't see it. And I don't want to continue the game until I've read the books, because I don't want to get spoiled for the books and then not read them when I have them on my shelf. Again, they're right there. So I'm gonna have to do that. But this book has pretty big font, and it's a pretty quick read, so I'll probably get through them pretty fast. The last book that I'm currently reading is Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson, and I am this far through, and I'm loving it. But again, I want to take it slow because it's such a good book, and I know the series is going to be fantastic, and I currently can't afford to buy the next 2, but I want to, but I gotta wait. So I'm taking this slow, and it's huge, so it'll take me a while anyway. Even though I read pretty fast, I can generally read a book like this size in about a day, so I shouldn't have a problem with reading them. All right, so that was the books that I read so far this year, and the books that I'm currently reading. Now I have to put them all back, which will take forever, but that's fine. And I will see you next time. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.